Hi, kindergartners. Today's story is A Bad Case of Stripes by David Shannon. We're going to be looking at making predictions today by looking at the cover and the pictures and by thinking about what's happening in the story so far. So, a prediction I can make at the beginning is I see a thermometer in her mouth. I think she might be sick. Another prediction I might make is the stripes might be part of the reason why she could be sick. As I page through the story, I can see different parts and how the story starts going on. She looks pretty normal in the first page, it looks like. Uh-oh, now she looks like she has some stripes. It looks like a doctor is taking a look at her and telling her to say, ah. Uh-oh, she's changing colors again in stripes. Now she looks a little bit different. Looks like maybe the kids aren't being so nice to her. Looks like maybe her dad and her mom are looking at her. And a lot of doctors are looking at her. So as we read the story, we're going to be thinking about making predictions and then checking to see how our predictions were, if they were right or not. Here we go. Camilla Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camilla was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today she was fretting, that means worrying, even more than usual. It was the first day of school, and she couldn't decide what to wear. There were so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits, but none seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and looked in the mirror. Then she screamed. I wonder what happened. Maybe I predict that she saw a spider. And it looks like I was wrong. Her mother ran into the room and screamed too. Oh my heavens, she cried. You're completely covered with stripes. This was certainly true. Camilla was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camilla's forehead. Do you feel all right? She asked. I feel fine, Camilla answered, but just look at me. You get back in bed this instant, her mother ordered. You're not going to school today. Camilla was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what other kids would say, and she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camilla. Most extraordinary, he exclaimed. I've never seen anything like it. Are you having any coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching? No, Camilla told him. I feel fine. Well, then, Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some ointment that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me. And off he went. The next day was a disaster. Everyone at school laughed at Camilla. They called her Camilla Cran in the night of the living lollipop. She tried her best to act as everything were normal, but when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red, white, and blue, and she broke out in stars. So she kind of looks like the American flag looks. Interesting. The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, let's see some purple polka dots. Sure enough, Camilla turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted checkerboard, and a pattern of squares covered her skin. Soon, everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camilla was changing faster than you can change channels on a TV. I predict that she might get upset from the kids not being kind to her. That night, Mr. Cream, the school principal, called. Or Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. I'm sorry, Mrs. Cream, he said. I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camilla at home from school. She's just too much of a distraction, and I've been getting calls from all the other parents. They're afraid those stripes may be contagious. That means it might spread to other kids. Camilla was so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her. Now nobody wanted to be in the same room with her. Her father tried to get her to feel better. Is there anything I can get you, sweetheart? He asked. No, thank you, sighed Camilla. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans, but she had been laughed at enough for one day. So she wasn't upset necessarily, but she was embarrassed, which is close, so my prediction wasn't too far off there. Hmm. Well, yes, I see, Dr. Bumble mumbled when Mr. Cream phoned the next day. I think we'll bring her, bring in the specialists. We'll be right over. About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. This is Dr. Grop, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young. Then the specialists went to work on Camilla. They squeezed, jabbed, tapped, and tested. It was very uncomfortable. Well, it's not the mumps, concluded Dr. Grop, or the measles, said Dr. Sponge. Definitely not chicken pox, put in Dr. Cricket. That was like Arthur, what he had yesterday and what DW caught, chicken pox. Or sunburn, said Dr. Young. Try these, said the specialists. They each handed her a bottle filled with different colored pills. Take one of each before bed, said Dr. Grop. Then they filed out the front door, followed by Dr. Bumble. So she had lots of people looking at her. That night, Camilla took her medicine. It was awful. When she woke up the next morning, she did feel different, but when she got dressed, her clothes didn't fit right. She looked in the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was a giant multicolored pill with her face in it. With her face on it, I should say. That's silly. I wonder what she'll turn into next. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called, but this time instead of the specialists, he brought the experts. Dr. Gord and Dr. Mellon were the finest scientific minds in the land. Once again, Camilla was poked and prodded, looked at and listened to. The experts wrote down lots of numbers, then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gord finally spoke. It might be a virus, he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls appeared all over Camilla, or possibly some form of bacteria, said Mr. Mellon. Out popped squiggly little bacteria tails, or perhaps it could be a fungus, added Dr. Gord. Instantly, Camilla was covered with different colored fungus blotches. The experts looked at Camilla, then at each other. We need to go over these numbers again. Back at the lab, Dr. Gord explained. We'll call you when we know something, but the experts didn't have a clue, much less a cure, so they don't know what's wrong with her. My prediction is strange things will keep happening to Camilla. By now, the TV news had found out about Camilla. Reporters from every channel were sitting outside her house telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredible changing kid. Soon a huge crowd was camped out on the front lawn. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionists, psychics, an old medicine man, a guru, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camilla's strange appearance until it was so hard to even recognize her. She sprouted roots and berries and crystals and feathers and a long furry tail, but nothing worked. So there my prediction was right. She did keep getting worse. One day, a woman who called herself an environmental therapist claimed she could cure Camilla. Close your eyes, she said, and breathe deeply and become one with your room. I wish you hadn't said that, Camilla groaned. Slowly, she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth. Her nose was a dresser, and 2 paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran from the house. What are we going to do? Cried Mrs. Cream. It just keeps getting worse and worse. She began to sob. That means she began to cry. At that moment, Mr. Cream heard a quiet little knock at the front door. He opened it, and there stood an old woman who was just as plump and sweet as a cranberry. Excuse me, she said brightly, but I think I can help. My prediction is I think she will help her. I have a good feeling about this. She went into Camilla's room and looked around. My goodness, she said with a shake of her head. What we have here is a bad case of stripes. One of the worst I've ever seen. She pulled a container of small green beans from her bag. Here, she said, these might do the trick. Are those magic beans? Asked Mrs. Cream. Oh my, no, replied the kind old woman. There's no such thing. These are just plain old lima beans. I'll bet you'd like some, wouldn't you? She asked Camilla. Camila wanted a big, heaping plateful of lima beans. More than just about anything, but she was still afraid to admit it. Yuck, she said. No one likes lima beans, especially me. Oh dear, the old woman said sadly. I guess I was wrong about you. She put the beans back in her bag and started toward the door. Camila watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good, and being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she'd been going through. She finally couldn't stand it. Wait, she cried. The truth is, I really love lima beans. I thought so, the old woman said with a smile. She took a handful of beans and popped them into Camila's mouth. Mmm, said Camila. Looks like the mouth is like her bed in her room. Because she turned into her room, remember? Suddenly, the branches, feathers, and squiggly tails began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camila, and everything was back to normal. I'm cured, she shouted. Yes, said the old woman. I knew the real you was in there somewhere. She patted Camila on the head. Then she went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterward, Camila wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird, but she didn't care a bit. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never had even a touch of the stripes again. So, kindergartners, that's a pretty cool story. David Shannon's a great author. He wrote the No David books and the books about David. When I was making predictions in the story, it helped me to really focus in on what happened next. And sometimes I was right and sometimes I was wrong, but it really helped me to pay attention to the story and keep reading more and more and make connections as I read. So, when you read today, I want you to make predictions as you read. In our activity today, we'll be looking at some covers of some books and making a prediction about what you think that book is about. Have a great day.